I binge watch my favorite shows because I have no self-control.
Oh, it's just so easy with Netflix.
So on today's episode of Spot On, we're going to look at why Netflix binge watching is the new book club. This is Spot On, a health and wellness podcast for college students, soon to be college students, or anyone that knows a college student. Spot On breaks through the latest health and wellness information hijacked from media headlines to provide you with accurate and usable information that is, well, spot on to meet your needs. I am your host, Dr. Joan Salge Blake. I am a nutrition professor at Boston University and the author of the college textbook called Nutrition in You, which is used in colleges across the United States and abroad. Okay, get ready for this. You ready? Netflix has 130 million customers in 190 countries. Okay? So, a recent statistic, over 90% of college students have access to a Netflix account. So I'm thinking the majority of those Netflix subscribers must be on college campuses. And another study I had read that approximately 75% of college students agree that most college students engage in binge watching. So let's go to the street and find out why you binge watch your favorite shows.
I tend to binge watch shows out of boredom or if I need to procrastinate something.
It's to avoid doing my school projects and homework and just all of the above when it comes to studying.
To avoid doing my homework.
If there's a cliffhanger, I gotta watch it, even if it's 2 a.m.
I keep watching a show no matter how long it takes me, how many days it takes me, I keep watching it.
If it's a new Netflix series, I just want to binge watch it all so I don't get any spoilers on Twitter.
Well, I binge watch my favorite shows because I have no self-control. And I think it's easier than ever now, especially with Netflix's auto play function, to just let it run.
I do binge watch Netflix shows. I feel like once you get into it, it's really interesting, and then you just want to finish because you want to see how the show goes.
Binge watching shows is a good way to relax when you have some free time. Also, it's fun to see the continuity if you watch a lot in a row.
Every time I catch myself binge watching a show, I hate myself because I know it's bad in my mind. I know it's not good for me. Oh, but it's just so easy with Netflix.
Today on the show, I'm really excited to have Sarah Krongard. She has a master's from Harvard and working on a PhD here at Boston University in emerging media studies. What she is working on is the social and emotional implications of media, including binge watching of shows. So she is the binge watching expert. Welcome to Spot On.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell me, how has these online streaming services, Netflix, how have they pretty much changed the way we watch our shows?
Sure. So I think they mainly have changed access. So we have access to just so many full seasons, and then we can watch them anytime, anywhere on our devices. So we can watch them on our smartphones. We can watch them on our tablets. It changes where, when, and how we consume. In the past, I think perhaps we were binge watching maybe through a marathon that was on TBS or something like that, or maybe VHS box sets, but those were, the box sets were quite expensive, and this was, few and far between. People would have one or two series. Now we just have so much access. We have control. We have agency where we decide when and what we consume. So these platforms have really given us as consumers power in a lot of ways to decide how we consume these shows.
Right. So it really has changed. It makes it more interactive. In other words, I'm in the driver's seat and I'm going to watch, the Walking Dead.
Yes.
When I want to watch it and how long I want to watch it.
Exactly.
So it's really, really interesting. Rather than I have to wait till next week for the next episode.
Right.
And see how the story is going on.
Sure.
So what is binge watching? I mean, what's the definition? Is it 2 or more shows at a time, 2 or more hours? 2 more straight days of watching it, not leaving the house, taking a shower. I mean, what is the definition of binge watching?
Sure. I don't know if the shower thing is necessarily part of it, but maybe we should think about it. There is some ambiguity in the field, I would say, with regard to coming up with a shared definition, which makes it a little bit challenging. So some scholars and popular resources define it as in a general way of just consuming large quantities of one show or series in a short period of time. So this is just kind of generalized. And I think that's how we perceive it. We understand the concept, but then some scholars get more specific when defining it. So they'll have, say, 3 episodes of one show in one sitting. And that I think has made it a little bit easier to quantify for more empirical articles. And that's what I've used in my studies. So 3 or more episodes of one show in one sitting.
That's not really that long because, they take out the commercials, right? And so what is an episode? Maybe 20 minutes? So what are we talking here? An hour? I mean, that doesn't seem that bad.
It seems that maybe it should be more on time than episode because shows can be from 22 minutes to an hour long drama or even now where because of these platforms, the form of content has been shifting. Something like Black Mirror has a new season out and it's just 1 episode and it's like a feature length, film length, but it's still a television show. Right. So we're really complicating what even is TV.
Right. And, it is, as I open up the segment here, it is something that these binge watching, we're all doing this.
Sure.
And they actually, I read an article, they actually list the top college binge watching series that college students watch. And ahead of the list is Walking Dead, The Office, Game of Thrones. I mean, Game of Thrones, you could binge watch, for a week? I mean, what?
Probably longer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 6 or so seasons, I think.
Yeah.
The Game of Thrones people are going to come at me if I got that wrong. But
right.
I mean, there's so much content. But also it could be perceived as, I'm watching one show over the course of several months, but that's the show I'm watching. So for me, for example, I don't watch a lot of TV right now. I have a little baby, but I will just stick to one show. So then that I feel like I'm binging, although it's not lengthy as far as hours or time spent with the show, but it's one program. So I would see that as binging. So I think there are some articles also that say it's very dependent on individuals' interpretation. So I think there's room for more qualitative research out there to find out how people are interpreting binge watching for themselves.
How many shows or what time, as you just said, in one seating is considering, okay, this is getting a little too much. How much is too much?
That's such a subjective question, and I'm not sure I can answer it. I would say that it depends on the motivations, and as you've seen in some pieces, there are articles that link binge watching to negative consequences or just negative relationships. So something like depression and loneliness and isolation can be linked to binge watching. Again, there's no causation here. We don't know if people are already feeling low and so they turn to binge watching to feel better, or if it's they've spent all this time alone watching TV and then feel worse. So it's hard to say causation, but I think that if it comes down to motivation, if you're streaming because, you're just in love with this content. I mean, if you were reading a bunch of literature, like, I'm going to read all the Jane Austens in 2 days, no one would be like, ugh, you're binging Jane Austen. So I think that there's a definite negativity within the term that some scholars have pushed back against. So Lisa Perks, she calls it media marathoning instead because binging is so negative. And Grant McCracken, he did a study for Netflix, and instead of calling it binging, he called it feasting because it was like people are just, loving this content. They're really digging in. So I would say it depends. I know that's a tough answer, but
something that is so interesting because now that I just said this, binging is a negative word.
Right.
But feasting isn't. And if you are just, there's downsides of it if you're doing it to the point where it's affecting your sleep or whatever.
Sure.
But if you're doing it, like you said, reading a book.
Right.
I mean, I remember, I'm going to age myself here, but I remember when the Harry Potter books came out, people were waiting at midnight for these books and then stayed up. And these are big books. Stayed up for 24 hours and read the book, and you wouldn't say like, "Wow, okay, you need to go see a psychiatrist."
Right.
You know what I mean?
You've got a Harry Potter addiction.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. That's exactly right. That's right. So I like the feasting when it's a positive.
Me too.
I love that word.
Yeah.
That's really good. So there are some gratifications you get, from this, and people want to relax.
Sure.
So, like you've been working all day and studying, because a lot of students do both, and they have jobs. And, I want to not think. So, I mean, I don't think there's a downside to relax around the office, right? I mean, watching The Office and laughing.
Right. I know. I agree with that completely. And I think that potentially people relax in different ways, too. There are people who find, maybe really intense, violent, or scary content relaxing because it kind of lets them separate themselves from this kind of intensity. It could even be a form of kind of release if they have all sorts of stress inside, but other people relax with something light and airy. So it also, I think, again, there's so much room for more to dig into why people and what they're watching, how they're interpreting these shows, and what these shows do for them.
Right. And, if you're watching it, just say you're at the gym,
Sure.
right? And you're watching it, and you're watching it while you're working out on a treadmill. What's wrong with this? I think that's no different than listening to music. So it's how you're doing it. But the issue is the social issue could be negative or positive, because if you're so to the point where it's getting ugly, that you're just watching it all by yourself, it can kind of divorce you from society, right?
I would think so, yes. And again, I don't know if it's any different than another type of medium, perhaps. So if you're playing video games to that point, too, it could have a similar effect.
Right.
Or if you're really obsessed with any one thing, it can lead to that sort of habitual use that turns into potentially addiction or something very negative. But I think maybe what makes television different is you feel this parasocial relationship with the characters, so you feel like you're connected to these people. And the studies on parasocial, which is these one-sided friendships where you think you're friends with Chandler and Joey and Ross and Rachel. I'm dating myself now, but you're actually, it's unrequited. That obviously they aren't feeling that to you. So perhaps it could start to blur a line of reality into to a sense of delusion if you go too far. I mean, parasocial relationships in general can be soothing, can be quite nice, and it's what connects us to shows. It's why we keep going back to them. But there's a point, where it could turn potentially problematic.
I'm sorry, but those friends were my friends.
I know.
Sarah. And
I hear you.
I'm sorry. I've been waiting for a Christmas card every year from them, and I've never received it, but I thought they were my friends. And I guess, all right, so I have to focus on that. Okay. All right, so there are, positives of feasting. Let's call it feasting, because I like that better. Like if you get together with all your friends, and let's watch this. So what are the positives?
I think that's a great way. I mean, I think especially college age, that time of your life is when you're really exploring, and I think pop culture becomes a part of your life, a way of connecting with people. There are, references that you want to get. It gives you some cultural capital to kind of it's a way of engaging with people. And I think the social piece, watching together, co-viewing is such a wonderful experience. It also encourages you to kind of question your own interpretations and think more critically about the content that you're watching. So I would say co-viewing is amazing. And also just having that knowledge allows you to participate in cultural discourse, which is a lot of fun. And a lot of these shows perhaps are getting more critically acclaimed and maybe even higher quality because of the way that they're being delivered. So the platforms themselves can shift storytelling to a point of maybe elevating the content. We're not getting this kind of silly sitcoms of the past where we're kind of having this more lofty, a little bit more challenging content.
Right, and they also are integrating what's happening in real life.
For sure, yeah.
And that's really very exciting. So, I had read that the when you watch it with a group, they call it screaming friends, which I love that. I love that. But if they're, if the show is taking in real time what's happening in the news, that's a great way to watch it and then have that conversation of what is going on and do you agree with the character on the television?
Yes.
And what's really going on in the news. So I think that's really fascinating. And we all know the way people are getting news nowadays are no longer just the newspaper. In fact, they're getting it on multiple media outlets. So this could be another way to follow a timely issue, inside among a group here. The other downside I can say about that, I did some homework on this, and I read that for college students, they could potentially affect their academic work. So tell me how that might happen.
So I think that this platform or this technology allows you to perhaps procrastinate if you are so inclined, and it's easy to just one more episode. But I would argue that if you're going to procrastinate, there are a lot of ways college students can procrastinate. So this is just one of the many ways. I wouldn't blame or even point a finger at the technology or even the habit. It's more. It's like it's a tool. You could be distracted by a pen and paper. You could be distracted by the birds outside. You could be distracted by your friends in the dorm. So I kind of think that it's another one. It's another distraction, and it's very enticing because it's fun. But I don't think that it's any different from the other challenges that college students face.
I'd imagine, if the point is you're feasting so much that you're not sleeping and you get up the next day and you miss a class because you overslept, or you're tired and you can't finish the paper or whatever, then there's a problem. But I think you're right. I think there's so many other distractions. Let's not put this one out as the number one. The only thing, being with a nutrition background, I'm like sedentary behavior. So that's the part that makes me a little nervous. Like, if you're binging feasting for 2 days and not showering, you're not really moving, so that's a problem.
Right, but I think, say it's this 3 episodes definition. You have plenty of time in your day to be active and then rest. A lot of people, I think, relax at the end of a day with some shows, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't exercise that day or that they don't have a healthy lifestyle. So I think it sometimes is not comparing the right things. And in traditional television, there's a lot of research that says perhaps television is replacing time we could spend at the gym. But I think that we really need to figure, is it actually doing that, or is that just a hypothesis? Because I'm not sure.
Television has been around forever, so
exactly.
I had read something that it could get to the level for some people, if they're doing it too often, too long, that they feel guilt about it.
Right. I have seen studies about guilt a little bit. I think because you feel like you should, what I read in that study as well, is that you feel like you should be doing something else, so you feel guilty about it. So that's a possibility. I've also read a TiVo study that said that people are viewing binge watching increasingly favorably. So I think that stigma of feeling guilt is kind of being pushed away. I think people are respecting the content so much that they're treating it like, high literature or something like that, which perhaps it is, and perhaps we're getting to that point where people are really deeply engaging with this content. That could be, cognitively demanding and challenging, which is powerful and positive.
Are you having trouble sleeping, focusing, or relaxing? If the answer is yes, then the TM Softs White Noise Sleep Sounds podcast has got you covered. This hour-long podcast is made to help you get rid of distractions, reduce stress, relax, and most importantly, get better sleep. You can listen to sounds of nature, white noise, relaxing music, and much, much more. You can check out the TM Softs White Noise Sleep Sounds podcast on Spotify or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. If you haven't heard about Anchor, let me tell you, it is the easiest way to make a podcast. Trust me, if I can do it on Anchor, anybody can do it on Anchor. Besides being easy, it's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit the podcast right from either your phone or your computer. And best of all, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you. And you can hear it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and many, many other platforms. So it is really like one-stop shopping, everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So really, if you're into this and you want to do this, Anchor is the place to go. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. In the world of nutrition and eating, we know that you can have something yummy to eat. And the first bite is, this is fabulous. The second bite will reinforce that the first one is good, but as you keep on eating it, it declines. So my question is binge watching. In other words, oh, the first show is great. The second one, oh, yeah, it's great. And then you start going third show, in a row. Does it get to the point where it makes the watching less entertaining?
That's interesting. I think that there has been a study that suggests, I think it was out of University of Melbourne, that binge watching does make the show less enjoyable and over time less memorable. Immediately more memorable, but then over time less memorable, which is interesting. That said, these participants were in a lab. They were binge watching in a lab, so they're not in their home. They're not with their friends.
Right.
So that perhaps is problematic. I'm not sure. That said, I think that the shows are now being crafted in a way that rewards binge watching. So I think we do have to be careful that we're not being exploited. So that that desire for more. I think that the creators are now adjusting the storylines to speak to that need, and maybe even heightening the violence so that we're not as desensitized. So because we need more stimuli in order to feed our desires, because we're watching so much.
Now, this is interesting. So could this be addictive?
I think it could be, and I think that that's the goal. If we're looking at it from the creator's perspective, of course they want us to keep watching. They would love that. So they're going to use all the science that they can
to say, right.
Exactly. So I think that we need to be savvy, and there are positives, and that it's potentially very cognitively engaging. However, I think we also need to be aware that Netflix doesn't care about our well-being necessarily. That's not their bottom line.
Right.
So I think being aware of these creators, who are they making this for? What is their goal?
What is the message?
What is the message? Yeah. So I think we need to be savvy. We don't want to be manipulated. So I think that my goal in my work is that I want people to be savvy media users and creators and not let themselves be manipulated by media.
Well, this leads us right to your study.
Sure.
And this was fascinating. You talked about the study about violence in binge watching. Can you explain your study and what you found? Because this is unbelievable.
Thanks. Sure. So the study that I conducted with Mina Saivogel here at BU, we did two studies actually that came into this one research project. So the first study looked at depictions of violence in the most commonly binge-watched online television series. So this was in the fall of 2015. So we had 5 shows that were the most popular at the time.
What were they?
Daredevil, Bloodline, Marco Polo, House of Cards, and The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt.
Ooh.
Yeah, a nice mix. So we wanted to analyze the ways in which violence was depicted. So we looked at how much violence, the context of violence, whether the violence was morally justified, meaning was it a hero trying to save the day by, taking down the villain? And then we looked at the perpetrators and the targets of violence. So we looked at their identities to see who was conducting the violence and who were the recipients of violence. In the end, what we found was that these shows were extremely violent, and the violence tended to be very intentional, graphic, serious, significant to the plot, and very little moral justification was happening. So we weren't seeing a lot of violence to support the common good, Yeah.
I read in your study that it was like 6 violent instances per hour.
Right, it was something right around there. I know.
It was like, that is unbelievable. I mean, that's a lot of violence
it really is,
going on there. And the other part of the study, you said that the viewers who spent more time consuming binge-watch programs were more likely to see the world as mean.
Sure. So the second study we did, we tried to look at the second-order effects. So we looked at how this might influence worldview, or how it related to worldview, because, again, no causation. Right. But we found that people who spent more time binging in general, and these shows specifically, saw the world as a meaner place and a less kind, friendly environment. So we saw that there was a relationship with these specific programs, especially because they're so violent.
Now that's very interesting. We got to stay on top of this, because as more and more of the streaming comes in, because if the producers are upping
exactly
the violence to get you hooked, or whatever. What is this doing to your mind, and how is that coloring what you see on the street? Like, you remember, this is a show. This is not reality.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's very, very interesting to almost step back and say, okay, I have to be careful with this because I'm watching a lot of this often,
Right.
And I'm all of a sudden looking at people on the street like they're bad people.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think a lot of it's subconscious. We don't
Right.
necessarily know that it's influencing how we see the world.
Right. You also did another study, which is really fascinating, and because right now, you know, we're into this whole political thing, and we have a political campaign coming up.
Yep.
But tell us about the relationship with binge watching and politics.
Right. So in 2016, my professor at BUCOM, Jacob Groshek, and I did a study on the relationship with civic engagement. So we were looking at how streaming television relates to social lives in general. And what we found was this positive relationship between time spent streaming and online and offline civic engagement, meaning, you know, do you attend town halls? Do you write a letter to your, you know, selectmen? Those kinds of actions. So it's not just, you know, signing a petition online. These are real in-person activities.
Get involved.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so what did you find?
So we found this positive relationship, which made us say that is curious, because that past studies have typically shown that television relates negatively to so the more television you watch, the less involved you are politically. But the findings over the years, and this started at the onset of television, people started looking at the relationship with politics, and it's been up and down and inconsistent, but consistently we found that news media relates positively. So people who watch the news on TV are more civically engaged. But here we're finding that it didn't matter what they were watching. It was just the time they spent streaming. So what we hypothesize is that it's these active, lean-in practices that we're engaging with. So we are in control of our content. We're making choices in the decisions. We're not passive recipients of media anymore. So is this activating some kind of, you know, agency within us that we then translate into the real world?
Right, right. You know, I was reading your study, which was fascinating, and you reported that you binging on certain shows had an effect on whether somebody was involved in politics. What I read is the House of Cards and Orange is the New Black or Homeland, they were grouped as streaming political content, and what happened to them?
Right. So what we found, what we thought that perhaps the content of the show would matter, but in the end, it didn't matter if it were political or apolitical content. So whether you're watching House of Cards or Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, the content didn't matter. It was genre agnostic. You were more civically.
Meaning what?
Meaning that it didn't matter what the type of content was. If you streamed more, you were more civically engaged, which we found fascinating. So, but we did have a pretty small sample of shows. When we asked about specific shows, we didn't get too deep into genre. So my current work is digging into this finding a bit more, because it is fascinating and it's a little curious, and I want to know more about this.
Right.
So people, you know, when we first started talking about this, they said, oh yeah, sure, if you watch House of Cards, definitely. That's what you would think, but it's a little counterintuitive here.
Right.
So my current dissertation work is looking into this, trying to break down genre more specifically, trying to see which of the shows might have more of an impact, and we'll see. I mean,
this is fascinating, it is fascinating because we're coming up into this political arena, and you know, and now we're streaming more. So you know, we're hoping that maybe you stream and then go vote.
Exactly,
that's a take-home message here.
Stream to the polls.
Let's go. So I want to thank you for coming on. I think this is really fascinating, and I think that what I'm going to do here is, if I'm streaming Game of Thrones, I'm going to also stream Friends the next day,
so that
because this way when I walk on the street, I make friends,
exactly.
and smile a little bit, and not to do one kind, because I don't want this colored look of the world.
It's true.
Negative look
I
of the
think
world.
I'm something that we can do. Try to get more balanced.
And I want to stream with friends, because I think that's a great way to talk things over. And I'm always having a party, so streaming with friends. So I just want to thank Sarah Krongard for very much coming here and talking about I don't know if we're going to call it binge watching, maybe feasting watching, okay, of streaming shows. And, there's some good parts of it, and there's some positives to it, but if it gets to the point where it's too much, you're not showering, I think you have to, pull it back a little bit. Sure. So, again, thank you so much for coming on Spot On.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Spot On. I am your host, Dr. Joan Salge Blake. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Joan Salge Blake. Please subscribe to Spot On through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you find your podcasts. Also, visit our Facebook page to join the conversation and tell us what you'd like to hear in future episodes. And oh, by the way, could you ask 5 of your friends or family members to download Spot On and subscribe to it? Do I ask a lot from you?